where we left off. As I mentioned, this was part of a very large presentation of almost 60 slides, and I broke it into about 5 presentations. So as I was mentioning earlier, when you look at these basic forms, a cylinder, a pyramid, a cube, a rectilinear solid, and a sphere, and you look at things that might have been in Rome, you see things like half domes, which are essentially half of a sphere, right? You see things like pyramids, you see drums. There's a number of different sort of shapes, and they're all there. They're all there and visible. And so the ancients relied heavily on that. And these forms are still in use today. The Capitol Records building is essentially a cylindrical building, right? You guys all know that building, I'm guessing. It's been in lots and lots of movies. You guys may have gone to Hollywood. The pyramid at the Louvre in France, that's been in some movies. I think it's been in some of the 007 films and stuff. But again, that's I.M. Pei creating this ancient pyramid out of glass. And it's that basic shape. All right? So in analyzing form, I mentioned that in addition to this idea of the sort of basic formal geometries, that there were also things that could be considered additive forms. And most of the time when you look at something, most of the architecture you're going to look at is additive in nature. Okay? So this is the picture view of that, I believe, that same temple that we saw earlier. Okay? And it has a linear form, but it's also considered an additive form in that the overall composition is made up of lots of pieces that are brought together in that line. Okay? And so a lot of times when you guys are analyzing something, it's going to be using a lot more than one of these sort of criteria. Okay? All right. This next image is a picture of Abu Simbel in Egypt, and it is an example of subtractive form, right? The Egyptians basically went to a mountain and they carved this big old giant form, and then they tunneled in, right, through the sculptural form. And there's actual pictures of this. I can call those up for you guys. They'll be in our lecture when we get to Egypt. But right now what we're studying is subtractive form. And the idea here is that they took a mountainside, sculpted these forms, and then created these tunnels to create this. I can't remember if it was a temple or it was a mausoleum. But there you have kind of that example of somebody subtracting away from something to create architecture. Okay? Ideas of sort of biomorphic form or organic form. Humans and animals, right, are organic in nature. We are not Euclidean, right? And so when you take a look at the Sphinx, right, that's one example of a piece of ancient architecture that has this sort of biomorphic organic form. The columns, which I've had students refer to as phallic, okay, I believe what they really represent, they do not represent what some of you are thinking they represent. What they actually represent is a bundle of reeds. Okay? They look like something else, which you might find in a shady store, some back alley somewhere. At any rate, scale. So scale becomes an important thing in understanding architecture. So sometimes when we walk up to something, we know that it's big because we're relating it to our human body, right? And so, you know, up here you see an image of, I'm not sure who this gentleman is right here, but you've got the sort of logarithmic spiral, okay, that has what they call the golden ratio. But in these two images, you see this gate, and you see a human figure in relationship to the gate. Now, imagine if I had not shown that figure. Imagine if there was a human being this tall next to this gate. You would get one sense of the scale of that gate, right? Whereas if I take that away, now that's a frickin' big-ass gate, right? So think about your house. Think about you taking a picture in front of your house. And now take a look at the size of the Great Pyramid of Giza and the people that are around the front of it. I mean, it's so big that you couldn't fill the frame. You could not. You'd have to walk way back or have a super wide angle in order to capture it because it's massive. All right. So this relates. The reason we're showing you these images is it relates to the scale of the building. So later on, when you go to analyze a work of architecture, right? So you go to work. You say you're assigned to analyze the Parthenon, which is on the Acropolis in Greece. One of the things you'll be looking at is what's the scale of it? What is the scale of the Erechtheion porch? What's the scale of a caryatid? Don't worry about those. You'll learn about that. But those are things, right, that when you go to analyze it, you're going to say, okay, well, from a scalar perspective, this building is, this one is not much bigger than a regular house as compared to this one, which is a very large structure, a large, massive structure. Okay? Enclosure. So you're going to look at a lot of ancient architecture, and you're going to look at some that runs right up to the Renaissance. Some of the buildings that you'll be looking at are going to be ruins. They're going to be buildings that are so ancient and so old that they're no longer in use. On the other hand, you're also going to be looking at buildings that were designed and built hundreds of years ago that are still in use today. Some of them for their original function, and some of them for a different function. So the reason I'm bringing that up is that if the building's in use today, more than likely it has a pretty clearly defined enclosure. It may not have been the enclosure that was defined early on when it was designed, but it may be close to it. Other things like ruins will be harder to get a sense of enclosure, and you'll have to kind of resort to other means to find out about the level of enclosure. So, for example, the Parthenon on the Acropolis, okay, what was the sense of enclosure there? What was the sense of enclosure in Abu Simbel, which we just looked at, the subtractive form in Egypt? Well, on the outside and under those, next to those two critters, right, you're still out in the elements, but as you walk back into that cave-like piece, there's a stronger sense of enclosure, right? The Parthenon is an ancient ruin, right? It dates back to BC times. It's no longer in use. It's a ruin that people go to look at and study. So level of enclosure is one of the things that becomes important for you to look at. And so the degree of enclosure, whether or not that enclosure provides an outlook or a view, all right, and the amount of light that the enclosure provides in the space are all characteristics of enclosure that you need to kind of understand. So path and circulation. So in the in-form, space, and order, Ching has sort of classified path and circulation. And remember, we're referring back to that initial slide that had all that crap on it. Not crap, all that stuff on it. So now we are kind of moving towards the end of it at path and circulation. And so Ching kind of divides it into these sort of pieces. So approach, right? The movement from a distance towards the entry. How do you approach a building? That becomes an interesting thing to note. Some buildings, for example, St. Peter's Basilica, you approach through these massive courtyards, and I got a picture of it coming up. And you're sort of walking at it, or sometimes you might take a path around the edges to get to it. Other buildings, right, are set up to where they surprise you. You're walking along a path, and you kind of turn around a corner, and boom, wow, there it is. You knew it was up there. You were going up there to go see this thing, but all of a sudden you turn around a corner, and bam, there it is. It surprises you. I clearly remember the first time that I saw the San Javier Mission in Baja California. It was such a surprise because I was down in the city of Loretto, and we decided to go up to go see the Mission San Javier, and to get to it is this treacherous dirt road on the edge of cliffs and shit to get out to it. And at one point we're like, we're in a 4-wheel drive going up the edge of the road, and we're like skittering out, and I look down, and it's like I look and I see green, right, and I try to focus on it. And what I was looking at, the green thing that I was looking at way down in that canyon, was the top of 70, 80-foot high palm trees. And I couldn't even tell. It looked like grass. And so I remember going on that thing, and then we got onto a plateau, and we started driving down through all this cactus and trees and shrub and stuff and boulders. And at some point, we came over this like little hill, right? And as we came over the hill and came down, there was this amazing piece of Spanish Moorish architecture in the middle of the Baja Desert, and the level of preservation was shocking because it doesn't rain there, right? So since it doesn't rain, things don't generally deteriorate. So it rains very, very little.
Where is it?
It's in from Loretto. I can show you guys on a map. It's cool. If you get down a chance to go to Baja, go see the Mission San Javier. Anyway, but approach becomes important, okay? Are you creating an element of surprise? Are you creating anticipation by seeing it in the distance? I remember walking up to this building a few weeks ago, and what you're looking at here is just the piazza in front of St. Peter's Basilica. The Vatican's back here. But this street that's out in front of it goes for miles. And most of it is pedestrian. You can't really drive on it. And I remember we took a bus, and the bus dropped us off way down the street. And when you stand on the center line of the street, this basilica is just massive. I mean, it's huge. And some of these structures, again, you're talking about scale now. They are huge. But here it's path and circulation. And so our circulation, as we approach this, we saw the building. And it's kind of like, oh, this is cool, man. Look at that thing. It's beautiful. And it's massive, and you're walking towards it, and there's a sense of anticipation occurring, right, as you see it and you get closer to it. Now, the Vatican sucked. It was like a cattle trough, 20, 30 feet wide, with thousands and thousands of people moving through like this. It was horrible. About 5 minutes in, I stopped looking, and I just wanted to get the hell out of there. I ran through the Sistine Chapel. I looked up, I saw God's finger, and I got out of there. I did. That's how uncomfortable I was. But
Is that many people?
I'll show you a picture. It is shocking. It is so uncomfortable. And it was 95 degrees, and we were inside of a building with no air conditioning. No. All right, so path circulation, this idea of entry. So this is a torii gate. It's a part of, I believe it's Japanese architecture. And this is, I believe, the Temple of Luxor. And you start to get an idea that one of the elements after approach is what designates entry in the building, right? Like in this building, you come to the end here, and it sort of looks like, well, there's this kind of piece that sticks out, and there's a staircase that you see. So yeah, that might be an entrance. But when you walk to the front of this building, it's pretty clear. You know, the entrance is this big, massive, cavernous glass enclosure, right, with all these doors in it. And there's steps going up to it, or there's like a little plaza in the back. The idea of what demarcates entry, right, is a distinctive architectural thought. This is a plan of the Acropolis showing the Parthenon and the Caryatid porch and a number of different things. Oh no, actually no. This is one of, I think it's one of the forums. No, it is the Acropolis. Never mind. There it is. So that's the Parthenon. The Caryatid porch is over here. I forget what this temple is called, but you can see the approach path to the primary building, which was the Parthenon, right? It's a circuitous path. You walk up these different like little sort of winding steps and rampways, and then you cross through a building and enter a courtyard. There's a statue. At that point, once you go through this sort of entry building and you enter this courtyard, you're seeing the statue in a wall, you can see this thing in the distance because this thing's big, right? But you still don't get to it, and you have to kind of walk around things to finally get to the entrance that's pointed away from you. Okay? So,
What's this called again?
that's the Acropolis of Athens. Mylins, Vietnam Memorial. This is one of the most powerful pieces of architecture that doesn't even have a roof that I've ever been to. It is an amazing, amazing work of architecture. And all it is basically, it's two cuts that line up with two different things. And so this whole idea of lines and axes, right? When you get to the bottom here and you turn, right, the Washington Monument is on a straight axis right in front of you. And the entire time that you're walking, the Washington Monument is reflected at night, especially on the black granite with all the names. Going this direction, it points straight at Lincoln, inside of the Lincoln Memorial. And it is, if you guys get a chance to go there, go, because that's in Washington, D.C. Yeah, that was my favorite thing in Washington. It was sad. It's really depressing to watch family members walk up and they put paper and they scribble over top of like one of their descendants, or not descendants, but one of their ancestors' names. It's sad, and it's a powerful piece because it is this sort of gouge in the earth. Again, another parti or idea, right? One of the things you're going to find that's different about architecture or great architecture is that it's not the same thing that you see on the sides of the hill here. It's not the same thing that most of us go to when we go home. That is more pedestrian architecture, more of your average everyday sort of utilitarian thing, right? Some of you might drive a Maserati. Others of us drive a Scion, right? My Scion is not a work of art like a Ferrari F40 or something. And in architecture, it's the same thing. Most of us don't live in a custom house. Most of us live, in a house that was built sometime in the last 100 years. So, but again, this is speaking to path and circulation and the sort of two lines that are sort of developed, one descending and then the other one coming up, and what you see at the end of each line as you walk through it. How many minutes are we at? 17, we're still good, right? All right, here is another example of path and circulation. This is the Guggenheim Museum in New York, all right? And this is Frank Lloyd Wright. Frank Lloyd Wright's idea of a gallery. So you think of a museum, think of a gallery, right? Don't most of you picture walking into a room and it's got artwork on the walls? Right? Guggenheim's not like that. The Guggenheim is a vertical spiral, and all of the artwork works its way up the spiral. And what you're looking at here is the different levels, or two of many different levels of the spirals of the Guggenheim. And so the path there is not, I'm going to walk to it and enter the room. You go there and then you start doing this constant circle going up it. Anybody remember Men in Black, the first one? Yeah, right? This is the building where he chases that thing and it jumps off the roof or whatever.
Oh shit, that's right.
Oh shit, that's right! Okay, so path circulation, here you see, what is a gallery now looks like a catacomb, which is a long linear space. And you see, kind of a grand entrance stair. I'm not sure which building that is. Proportion. So we talked about this idea of proportion. So how far are we through the list? What? Number 5? How many are left? No, that initial list.
There's 7 on the list.
There's 7? Oh, all right. So good. We're almost there, man. Woo! You guys are going, man, this guy talks forever. All right, so proportion. I talked about the notion of proportion and the idea of, I think this is the Vitruvian Man, right? And how your body becomes this thing that by which you kind of measure other things. And when you look at like ancient architecture, particularly Roman and Greek architecture, you start to see that the proportioning of something using the golden means and a number of different ratios, right, not only dictates the overall size of the building, but it starts to move into how the building is subdivided and what proportions the columns have, and a number of different pieces. We'll talk about that more when we get to the orders of Greek and Roman architecture. And I think that's it. That's as far as this slideshow goes. So I'm going to press escape, and I'm going to stop the video.